cafe buzzed with the familiar hum of quiet conversations, the occasional clatter of dishes, and the low hum of music drifting from the speakers. A place like this, warm and filled with the scent of coffee and fresh pastries, should have felt comforting, but tonight it felt like a stage where the final act of something that had once meant everything to him was about to play out. Jake sat across from Sophie, fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He didn't really taste it. His focus was on the woman in front of him, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the way her lips parted slightly as if weighing her next words. He already knew what she was going to say before she even spoke. I need time, she said finally, exhaling as if the words themselves carried weight. I don't know what I want, Jake. I don't want to lose you, but I don't think I'm ready for... He didn't let her finish. He wasn't going to sit here and listen to her uncertainty wrap itself around him like a chain, keeping him tethered to a place he no longer belonged. Jake set his cup down gently, the sound barely noticeable over the cafe's ambiance. He met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he felt completely in control. Okay, he said simply. Sophie blinked, clearly expecting an argument, a plea, something to reassure her that he would wait, just like he always had. Okay, she repeated. Yeah. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his fingers out against the table before pulling them away. Take your time. Relief flickered in her expression. She thought she had won, that he would be there, waiting in the background, ready to pick up the pieces when she finally decided he was worth choosing. But Jake had already made his decision. He stood, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair and slipping it on. Sophie's relief wavered, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Where are you going? He smiled then, something small and knowing. Forward, and just like that, he turned and walked out the door. The cold night air hit him as he stepped onto the street, but it wasn't unwelcome. It was crisp, clean, filled with possibilities. He exhaled, watching the breath escape him, feeling something deep inside loosen like a knot finally untangling. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and did what he should have done a long time ago. He deleted her number. He unfollowed her on every platform where she might linger like a ghost. For the first time in years, Jake felt weightless. Tonight wasn't an ending, it was a beginning, and he had no intention of looking back. The first thing Jake did when he got home was put his phone on silent, place it face down on the counter, and leave it there. He wasn't waiting for a call. Not anymore. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make him restless. There had been too many nights spent staring at the ceiling, waiting for a message that sometimes came, sometimes didn't. Too many moments of checking his phone, only to find nothing. But tonight the silence felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. Without overthinking, he moved through his place with purpose, gathering up the things that had tethered him to a version of himself he no longer wanted to be. A sweater Sophie had once borrowed, still tucked away in his closet. A few old photos that had remained on his desk longer than they should have. A half-empty bottle of perfume she had left behind the last time she stayed over. He placed them all in a bag, walked it straight down to the dumpster outside, and then looked back. By the time he returned, something inside him had shifted. The air in his apartment felt lighter, like he had cleared out more than just physical reminders, like he had made space for something new. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual, sunlight streaming through the blinds. He stretched, rolled over, and out of pure habit, reached for his phone. A single message from Sophie. Hey, just wanted to check in. Are you okay? For the first time in a long time, he felt nothing when he saw her name. No rush of anticipation, no hollow ache in his chest, just nothing. He thought about responding, about crafting something neutral and polite. But then he remembered last night. The weightlessness, the clarity of walking away. And he knew a response wasn't necessary. Instead, he did the one thing that would make everything real. He blocked her number, and that was that. Over the next few weeks, Jake started rediscovering himself. It wasn't about doing anything drastic. It was about reclaiming the parts of him that had been neglected while he had been waiting for someone else's indecision to make sense. He went back to the gym, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he missed the way his body felt after a good workout. He picked up his old hobby of photography, wandering the city with his camera, capturing moments he had once been too distracted to notice. And most importantly, he started saying yes to things he had put off. A weekend trip with friends to a cabin by the lake, a new project at work that challenged him. Even something as simple as trying a new cafe instead of the one he and Sophie used to frequent. Slowly, his life became his own again. It was on one of those aimless photography walks that he met Lily. It wasn't a grand cinematic moment, no dramatic music, no instant fireworks, just a quiet, unexpected encounter that felt easy. She had been sitting on a bench, sketching in a small notebook, her curls catching the sunlight. He had paused to adjust his camera settings, and she had glanced up, catching him mid-frame. "You're either taking a photo of me," she had said with a teasing smile, "or there's something really interesting behind me." He had laughed, lowering the camera. "Mostly a tree. Maybe a little view." "Fair enough," she had replied, closing her sketchbook. "You should at least show me the picture if I'm going to be in it." And just like that, a conversation began. Unlike Sophie, there was no pretense with Lily, no games, no hidden meanings. She spoke with a quiet confidence, and there was something about her that put him at ease. By the time they parted ways, she had given him her number, not in a way that felt like a demand, but in a way that left the choice entirely his. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he wasn't part of someone else's story. He was writing his own. Sophie had always believed Jake would be there. It wasn't something she ever said out loud, but it was a quiet certainty, a comfort she kept in the back of her mind. He was stable, dependable, someone she could return to when the noise of her life became too overwhelming. So when weeks passed and he didn't reach out, when he didn't like her posts, didn't leave a single trace of his presence in her world, the unease began to creep in. At first, she told herself he was just giving her space. That was what she had asked for, after all. Then curiosity took over. Late one evening, she opened their last conversation, expecting to see the usual sign that he was online, that he had at least seen her message. But instead, her message still sat there, unread. Something wasn't right. She opened Instagram, only to find his profile missing from her following list. Frowning, she searched his name, but his account didn't show up. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. He had removed her completely. It was as if she had been erased from his life, and that was when the panic set in. She tried texting again, something casual. "Hey, just thinking about you, hope you're doing okay." No response. The thought had never crossed her mind that Jake might actually walk away, that he might not wait, that he might, for once, put himself first. She had expected distance. Not finality, not this. And then, days later, she saw it, a photo. One simple image that shattered every assumption she had made. It was just a hand, fingers intertwined with another's, resting on a table next to a half-empty cup of coffee. No caption, no explanation, just a moment captured and shared. But she knew that hand, Jake's, and the one holding his, not hers. Her breath caught as she stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She started typing, then stopped, then started again, then nothing. The blinking cursor mocked her hesitation. What was she supposed to say? She had let him go. She had left him waiting in the purgatory of her indecision, assuming he would always be there, frozen in place until she was ready. But he wasn't waiting anymore. She locked her phone and set it aside, staring blankly at the dark window in her apartment, her own reflection staring back at her. For the first time in a long time, Sophie realized that she wasn't the one in control of this story, and she hated it. Jake, on the other hand, wasn't thinking about Sophie. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't on his mind. Not when he went for a morning run, feeling the rush of cool air against his skin. Not when he met up with his friends for drinks, laughing more easily than he had in years. Not even when he picked up his camera, capturing the city through his lens, seeing beauty in things he had overlooked before. His life had expanded beyond her, and part of that expansion was Lily. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't a whirlwind romance filled with passionate declarations. It was something quieter, easier. They met for coffee one afternoon just because. No expectations, no pressure, and it turned into 2 hours of conversation. Then a second coffee date, then an impromptu trip to a bookstore where they both ended up buying copies of the same novel, promising to read it at the same time. Then a walk through the park where she stopped to pet every dog she saw while he captured the moment on camera. She didn't demand his attention. She didn't keep him at arm's length while pulling him back in whenever she felt lonely. She was simply there, and that was enough. One evening, as they sat on a rooftop overlooking the city's skyline, Lily turned to him with a thoughtful look. "You seem lighter," she said, tilting her head, "like you've let go of something heavy." Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," he admitted. "I think I have." Lily didn't ask for details. She didn't pry. She just smiled. Good, she said simply, clinking her drink against his. And that was it. No complications, no overanalyzing, just an understanding that sometimes moving forward didn't require a grand declaration. Sometimes it just meant choosing yourself. Meanwhile, Sophie sat in her apartment staring at her phone again. The image of Jake's hand in someone else's still lingered in her mind. She wanted to believe she was fine, that this was just a temporary feeling, something fleeting, but the truth was undeniable. She had lost him. Not in some dramatic, screaming fight, not in a way that left doors open for reconciliation. She had lost him in the quietest way possible. He had simply stopped waiting, and that was what hurt the most. She wanted to text him, call him, tell him she had finally figured things out, tell him she was ready now, but deep down Sherry knew the answer. He wasn't waiting for her response. He wasn't waiting for her at all, because he had already moved on, and now she had to live with that. The first time Sophie ran into Jake, after everything, it wasn't planned. She had told herself she wasn't going to reach out, that she wasn't going to chase him, that she would take this as a lesson, let time do what it always did, soften, blur, and eventually fade. But time hadn't worked fast enough. She still caught herself reaching for her phone at night, fingers hovering over his name before she reminded herself there was no point. She still thought she saw him in crowds, only to realize it was just her own memories clinging on. And now, by some cruel trick of fate, here he was. It was a Saturday morning, and their cafe was as busy as ever. Sophie had been standing in line, staring at the pastries behind the glass, when she heard a voice that sent a shiver through her body. Jake's. She turned instinctively, her pulse jumping. And there he was, standing by a corner table, leaning slightly forward, laughing at something. Not at her, at someone else. Sophie recognized the girl instantly. The same soft waves of hair, the same natural ease, the same fingers from the photo that had haunted her for weeks. Sophie's stomach twisted. She had told herself 1,000 times that she was prepared for this, that of course Jake would move on, that she had no right to feel anything about it. But knowing something and feeling something were two different things entirely. The barista called her order, snapping her back to reality. She turned, grabbed her coffee with stiff fingers, and forced herself to walk past them. Maybe Jake hadn't noticed her. Maybe she could still leave, disappear, pretend like this never happened. But then, Sophie, his voice stopped her in her tracks. She inhaled, straightened her shoulders, and turned. Jake was looking at her, eyes calm, unreadable. The way they used to be before she had learned to decipher every flicker, every hesitation. Now, she wasn't sure she could read him at all. Hey, she said, forcing a small smile. Lily turned, offering a polite nod. Hi, she said, her voice smooth, effortless. Sophie had imagined this moment countless times. She had run through all the scenarios, what she would say, how she would carry herself, how she would make it seem like she was fine. But now, standing here face to face with reality, she felt like she was standing on the edge of a stage with no script. Good to see you, Jake said, and the sincerity in his voice made it worse, as it was good to see him, but not like this. Yeah, you too, she managed, gripping her cup tighter. You look well. Jake nodded. I am. No hesitation, no over-explaining, just fact. The weight of that simple statement hit her harder than she expected. She was the one who had left him in limbo, keeping the door cracked just enough to come back whenever she was ready. But he had closed it, and he had walked through another one, a door that led straight to Lily. Sophie's throat felt tight. She gestured vaguely toward the door. Got somewhere to be. Jake nodded again, offering a small, easy smile. Take care, Soph. The way he used to say it when things were good. Only now, it didn't feel like warmth. It felt like goodbye. She turned and left, walking faster than she needed to, the sound of the cafe fading behind her. She didn't let herself look back. For Jake, the moment passed quickly. He had braced himself when he saw her, waiting for the familiar tug of emotion, but it never came. He had moved on, truly and fully. Seeing Sophie now wasn't painful. It wasn't anything really, just a reminder of a past life, and he was done living in the past. Lily studied him as he took a sip of his coffee, her gaze thoughtful. That was her, wasn't it? Jake nodded. Yeah, she looked like she saw a ghost. He let out a small chuckle. Maybe she did. Lily tilted her head. And what about you? He considered it for a moment, then smiled. No ghosts, he said simply. Lily's lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. And just like that, the moment was gone. The past didn't matter, because Jake was too busy living the present. Sophie, however, wasn't as lucky. She walked without direction, her coffee untouched, her mind replaying every second of that encounter. She had expected anger, resentment, even hesitation, but Jake had given her none of that. Just a quiet, effortless peace. He was happy, really happy, and she wasn't part of it. She had thought she had time. She had thought he would still be there. She had been wrong, and there was nothing she could do to change it. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she finally let herself accept the truth. Jake was gone, not in the way she had imagined, not in some dramatic, tragic way, but in the way that hurt the most. He had simply moved on, and now she had to find a way to do the same, even if she wasn't sure where to start. Sophie never sent the message she had written. She had typed it out more than once, in fact. Sometimes it was casual, sometimes apologetic, sometimes even hopeful. But each time she deleted it before pressing send, because deep down she already knew the answer. It wouldn't change anything. Jake was gone, not because he hated her, not because she had done something unforgivable, but because he had chosen himself. And for the first time, Sophie had to live with the consequences of a decision that wasn't hers. She had spent so long assuming he would always be there, orbiting around her, waiting for her to figure things out. She had convinced herself that she wasn't really losing him, just keeping her options open. But love wasn't something you put on a shelf to pick up later. And now there was no later, no second chances, no waiting, just absence. She had never considered what it would feel like to be the one left behind. Jake, on the other hand, had never felt lighter. It wasn't about Lily, though he enjoyed her company. It wasn't about replacing Sophie, about proving something to himself or to her. It was about finally being free. He no longer woke up with the weight of waiting, no longer lived his life in a constant state of hoping someone else would make up their mind. His life was his again, and it showed. His friends noticed at first how he laughed more, how his presence felt whole instead of half distracted. His colleagues saw it too, the way he threw himself into his work with fresh enthusiasm, no longer drained by the emotional limbo he had once been stuck in. And Jake noticed it in himself. In the simple moments, a morning coffee without checking his phone, a walk through the city without feeling like he needed to be somewhere else, a conversation with Lily that didn't feel like a rebound, but something real, something separate. He had just moved on. He had grown, and that was something he had never expected to come from all of this. Sophie tried to move on too. She forced herself to delete the last remnants of him from her life. Old texts, photos, memories stored in folders she had been too afraid to open. She went out more, spent time with friends, even went on a few dates, but none of it felt the way she wanted it to. Because the truth was, she wasn't just mourning the loss of Jake. She was mourning the version of herself that had taken him for granted. She was mourning the security she had assumed was hers to control. She was mourning time she had wasted waiting for the perfect moment, only to realize there was no such thing. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, she let herself feel it, the regret, the sadness, the aching understanding that this was her doing. She had spent so much time expecting him to wait that she had never stopped to wonder if she was the one running out of time. And now she had run out, but life didn't stop, and eventually neither would she. Jake never checked Sophie's messages, not because he was angry, not because he didn't care, but because there was nothing left unsaid. He had made his choice, and for the first time in a long time, he had no reason to look back. His life wasn't about proving something to anyone anymore. It's about living. And that's exactly what he intended to do, with or without Sophie, with or without regret. Because moving on wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing the future, and Jake had already chosen.